Well, hey Emmaus, Micah here. I can't believe it. We're in week 8 of our Holy Formed series. This has been such a pivotal time as we've spent this concerted effort walking slowly, bite off, chewable chunk sermons as we just walk through this series, Holy Formed, looking at what the practices that we do, who we are, how we walk and go through just the everyday moments of our lives and schedules and families, and how we're encountering God, how God invites us in to relationship with Him through just these most mundane and practical ways. Jacob was with you last week and we just did an amazing job of taking all of us through the idea that we have this unhurried God, this God that we can walk with and savor various things, that it's in this space in between that we actually can encounter God. Well, this week, as we've walked through these moment by moments of our day, from waking to brushing teeth, to emailing, to working, to Sabbath rest, to how we engage with community, to how we engage our world, well, there's no other place that we can end up with this scope that we've been walking on, with this day in the life of a believer that we've been walking in, other than to end with our sleeping, with going to bed. And that's where we are today. Our habits, our habit of sleep, our habit of rest, our habit of Sabbath, and how that relates to God. What are your habits? What are your nightly routines? Do you find it hard to go to sleep at night? What things keep you from sleep? What things keep you up at night? You see, all these questions that I just asked you, your answer to those things say a lot about you. Now, some of them are funny, but as we walk through these, what I want you to see is that they start to really get at the heart of the matter. Now, for most of us, if you're my age, I'm getting about to turn 40 this next year, and I'm finding night after night, with more and more regularity, I'm falling asleep on the couch. I'm falling asleep on the couch. Netflix is going through episode after episode as me and Kelly fall asleep. The girls are in bed. We really need to be going to bed, but what happens is we're completely out. Well, what inevitably happens is then I wake up as I have to get to bed and make the coffee and turn the lights off and brush my teeth and sometimes shower or anything that we do at night. And then I'm laying there in bed. And my body is tired, but my mind turns back on. And I start going through my day. I start going through all the little stressors, all the things I could have done different, all the things I could do tomorrow, all the things I need to do tomorrow, all the relationships that I have. That's where I am. That's a little bit of a window into where I am in my nightly rituals. But man, there's all these little things. Like I mentioned, coffee is one of them. Honestly, I like getting the coffee ready at night because, man, when I wake up, I'm too sleepy to start the whole process the next day. And honestly, it's one of the things that actually gets me in bed at night, is the idea that I can have that morning cup of coffee. We have lots of little idiosyncrasies and nightly rituals. I honestly am a person who requires little sleep. Kelly, on the other hand, she requires much more sleep than I do. If someone's going to be up with the kids in the night, usually it's me. Kel will get up in the morning. I'm also a morning person as well. But the reality of it is if I really stop and think, as I prepared for this week, as I read the last chapter in Tish Warren's book, what I started to see was, as I looked into the window into my own self, my soul, my practices, is I started to ask my question, why do you try to stay awake, Micah? What is keeping you up? What are you resisting by going to sleep? What are you trying to put off by not going to the next day? Because that's the reality for me. Most of the time, if I'm honest with myself, and I say this to Kelly often, that I don't want to go to sleep because I really don't want to face the next day and the things that I have to do the people that I have to interact with, the emails I have to send, or the next mundane day, raising a family or going to work, or all those things, that's me. And so I try to put that off as long as I can. I think if I stay up, well, I won't have to face that. Maybe that's not you. Maybe you have no trouble going to sleep at night. Maybe you sleep too much. But what does that say about you? What are your joys? What are your triumphs? You see, all through the scriptures, we see this idea of sleep. We see it in the Old Testament, throughout the Psalms. The psalmist is talking about sleep. You see Jesus all throughout the Gospels going off to rest, sleeping in a boat, talking about sleep with the disciples on his last night that he was alive. What is so crucial? What is so pivotal about sleep? Well, here's the reality is that sleep does 4 things. One of the things that sleep does is it reveals. It reveals, it exposes. It reveals and exposes all these things that we hold to. Who we feel like is in control. As Americans, you guys know that one of the things that we most often say with people as we meet them, how you doing? What's going on? We say things like, I'm just tired. I'm just busy. And we almost say those just so fast and just so quippy that we don't really actually, they're not even our real answers. But the reality and the thread through all of them is we're busy, we're tired, we're exhausted. And also the reality is this last 7-8 months of COVID really hasn't changed much. You might be staying home, you might be working from home, you might not have been to a restaurant yet, but the reality is we're just as tired, we're just as exhausted, we're just as resistant to actually getting rest than we've ever been. Why is that? We live in this culture that is productivity driven. You are what you do, you are what you produce. Every day is just this onslaught and fight to be as productive as we can possibly be, to squeeze every ounce of time, resource, money, all of the above into each day. This is not the way it should be. As cultures have gone throughout the centuries, one of the things we know is that even long ago, as the sun went down, that was the end of the day. And it didn't start up again until the sun came up. We know that we just work all day, all night, into the hours, sleep problems. We are one of the most sleep-deprived people. What are these things revealing? What are these things exposing about us? Because that's the other thing. Sleep and this idea and our relation to it reveals things, exposes things. Do you have a fear of going to bed? Are there anxieties or depressions that come up in the night for you? These are very real things. You just shouldn't feel bad about them. But the reality is they reveal and it exposes. One of the other things that we know is that our sleep helps to shape us. It shapes what we love. It shapes our desires. And it also directs us. It directs us onto the correct things. It directs us onto the right things. It pries our grip off this day as we have to move into the next day. We have to relinquish that grip, that control. This is the stuff sleep does. Well, it's no wonder that Jesus, as he's talking to the disciples in Matthew's gospel, as he says in Matthew 11, verse 25, he says, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven, of earth, that you've hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to the little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone whom the Son chooses to reveal him. And then he makes this invitation. He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. You see, Jesus is saying, all things were given to me. I'm in control of all things. All things are mine, so come and rest. You see, that's not normal. We think, man, if someone is in control of all things, he's going to demand many things of us. He's going to be a taskmaster. We kind of have that projected onto ourselves. We project it onto others, that man, the man with the gold makes the rules, and we better hop to. Well, here's Jesus flying right in the face of that, and he's saying, listen, the Father's given me everything, including you. Now come and rest, because all things are mine. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. You see, the very next section, at the beginning of chapter 12 of Matthew, is the question about the Sabbath, as they come accusing the disciples of working the Sabbath. And Jesus, before he can even say and teach them what it means to walk with him, he has to teach them that he is a God of rest. And he says, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. You guys have a fundamental misunderstanding about how this world works and what a Sabbath is for. You see, Sabbath, just like it was when God rested when he created and instituted the seventh day would be a day of rest. Jesus picks up on that, and he's living it out, and he's saying, look, there's a reality written into the created order that gives you rest. I am the Lord of that rest. Come to me. I give what I've written into creation. I've made you to function as a people of rest. You see, we are a people of rest. We were created that the day would have a beginning and an end. The weeks would have a beginning and an end. The years would have a beginning and end. There is grace, common grace, in even the calendar. There's common grace in the day. When we talk about this reality of his mercies being new in the morning, that's not just something for a cross stitch. That's not something just to post on your social media wall. It has real realities, a thread from the beginning of creation until today, that his mercies are new, and they're new because we go through this passageway each day of sleep. Well, you might be wondering, where are we standing today? Michael, what are you doing? Why are you in the cemetery in downtown Raleigh? Well, I wanted to stand here because it's a visual representation of a final place of rest, death. Now, I know in our culture, I want to be very sensitive that we are in this pandemic, and there's been many people dealing with death of loved ones. This is a harsh reality. So I'm not here to make light of that in any way or glib it up with this teaching, but I want us to understand that there's deep roots and connectivity to this idea of death and sleep. You see, death is a reality. Maybe like any year in our lives, especially in a generation, we are aware of that this year. There is sickness, there is death. We are not in control. Others are in control. Mainly a sovereign Lord who's in control. Our days are numbered, and there is a finiteness to our very existence. Now, this could make us some kind of fatalistic, woe is me, glass half empty, depressed, anxious person. And if we're all honest, it makes us that way. But the reality of it is that this reminder was also written into creation as we talk about sleep, as we talk about rest. Yes, we're headed to a Sabbath rest one day, but as soon as we start to come into contact with our finiteness, that we're reminding ourselves that I will die someday. I will have to ungrasp my tight hold on my life and the things about my day finally. But every day you and I rehearse this with sleep. You see, sleep is one of those things that no one is immune to. We all wear out. We all need sleep. You can only go so long without sleep. You can go much longer without food, much longer without water. But man, you go more than a couple days without sleep, you start going crazy. This is a reality. Sleep speaks of our finiteness. It speaks of that we are dying, that we will die one day, that we have an end, and that we need someone or something in order to experience life eternally. We need someone to actually go to work while we sleep. You see, that's exactly what the Bible teaches. In Psalm 121, you think of it as maybe as the part where it's like we're lifting our eyes to the hills, but there, in verse 5 and 6, how the psalmist begins to talk about those things all throughout. He says, verse 4 rather, he says, "He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you, he will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep." Did you know that it's the moment that we go to sleep that God begins to work? And that's that moment, as you release today into tomorrow, that God actually picks up the reins. He so sweetly and gracefully pries your fingers off today, pries my fingers off today, today's worries, today's stresses, and he says, go to sleep. I have a new day for you tomorrow. The Scottish minister John Bailey, he said that like this, he said, "We wake up better men than we went to sleep." This is what it means. And this is what we're talking about. You guys have been spending 8 weeks, we've all been spending 8 weeks talking about the different practices of our day. Well, the reality of it is that we have a God who starts working in those moments. He starts putting all our pieces together. And this is also that piece that we have been talking about this whole time, where we have all these practices, these pieces, these little broken pieces, if you will. And we've been picking them up and we've been trying to put them together into this reality that is our lives. Well, you see, this is what we've been talking about for 8 weeks. We've been talking about various little tidbits of our lives. And these tidbits, these pieces, if you will, these practices, these questions that we've been asking as we've examined, what do I do with this? Well, how do I do this? As we've picked those up and we've looked at them, now we've been trying to put them to something. We've been forming something. We've been looking at how God is using and shaping us and molding us all throughout. Well, sleep is kind of the final piece in this series, because it's something that speaks to us of not work, but release. Depend. That's the Christian life. It's one of dependence. It's not one of independence. That's where Christ goes to work, making us into who He's already destined us and created us to be. Well, maybe you've been looking at the graphic. We're always implanting little pieces of purpose of each series into that graphic. Well, this one's no different. You notice that it looks like a crack, golden, like fissures or cracks in maybe a pottery. Well, that's exactly what it is. You see, there's this practice in Japan, an ancient practice called kintsugi. Kin meaning gold, suki meaning to mend. And these tea masters, the tea ceremony being what it is in Japan, was this ancient ritual. And these Japanese tea masters would pass this tradition down from generation to generation. Well, they had this precious tea sets and teapots, and they would pass these down as well. Well, what began to happen, obviously, as things got old and worn out, things began to break. Pottery wore out. Pottery broke down. Well, they began to have this practice where they would take these broken pieces of pottery. They would study them. They would look at them kind of meditatively. And then they would take it and they would mix gold with a mortar, and they would put these pieces of pottery back together. And it was in the putting back together and that practice, that artistry, that craftsmanship of this tea master, that what actually began to happen is, as the centuries went on, that these mended pieces of pottery, these mended teapots and cups, they actually started to take on a invaluable property. The mended, the Kitsuki pottery became more valuable than even the originals. And what an amazing image of this entire series, of what we're exactly talking about, not just in the series, but what is these realities going on through creation and in your life and in my life, that we are picking up these pieces, that God has taken our very lives, our broken lives, worn down, worn out, practices not as they should be maybe, running after things that we shouldn't run after. We know I should be doing this more. I should be spending more time at this. I should be thinking less of this, or I should be thinking more of that. But we take all of those things, and the tea master, who is God, the ultimate tea master, our good and precious Savior, He takes all these things and He forms us back. And He forms us back, and what He puts back together is even more precious than anything you or I began with. And He then fills them. And this is that exact idea that Paul's talking about in 2 Corinthians 4, when he talks about that we are just earthen vessels filled up by Christ and the work that He's doing. So you see, you might be feeling today, after these 8 weeks, that, man, I am no good. I've got a lot to work on. Well, that's how you should feel. But not in an effort to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but in an effort to bring those to Jesus, the great tea master. And He's going to take them and He's going to put them back. He's going to mix them with His Spirit and His gold. And He's going to make something beautiful that He can fill, that He crafted with His own hands. And that is the Christian life. That is what our practices do as we walk and live and move. You see, this is where we are. And it's in these places, as we acknowledge those places, that's exactly where Christ comes and He puts that golden mortar and mends those things up. And He injects new life into our practices. He injects growth into our lives, our spiritual lives, and we begin to walk afresh and new with Him. This is what He's doing. This is how we become little Christ in our world. It's as the wounded healer that Henry Nouwen talks about in his book called Wounded Healer. As we do that, we become these little wounded healers. We become unleashed in our society, in our world, as people who can actually tell people and speak hope into this creation, that Christ is mending something, He's building something, He's making something, He's renewing all things, and this is not the end. Death is not the end. Sleep is not the end. Anxiety, depression, that's not the end. You can give it up. You can release your grip on even just today. You can take a nap. It's okay. His mercies are new every morning. His mercies are new. This is what this idea of sleep does, and this is what it caused, and this is what Christ is doing. Come, follow me, I will give you rest. That's what He's promised. He's promised you rest. He's promised me rest. The one who holds all things in His hand is promising rest if we'll just trust Him, if we'll become dependent on Him. Well, where do we go from here? This is definitely not the end. This is just the beginning. You have examined things. We've all examined things. We've examined things together as a church of kind of these practices. Well, this is just the starting point, because Christ wants to continue building. He wants us to now set on this thing more practices, more things, and more pieces that He can grow, that He can knit together and make something beautiful out of. You see, we've been digging the footings. We've been putting in the vine, the scaffolding. We've been putting in the trellis, if you will. And that's exactly where we're going to go from here. We're going to walk into our Advent season, and we're going to still keep examining some things together with our new series, Light in the Darkness. You'll be hearing more about that. But this reality is, we are going to keep examining. We're in a season of examining. We're in a season of looking at what those things are. So let me invite you guys to lean into some things with what we would call a rule of life. One of the things that I know is going to be a next step, and I'll send a video out this week so you guys can hear some more about that. But I would encourage you to start trying to build a rule of life. A rule being just an ancient word of this regulating thing. We want to now begin to take what we've been looking at this series with some practices, and we want to now take them and now putting some more spiritual practices on them. Bible reading, prayer, Sabbath, the way that we do some daily activities as we continue to build that trellis. It's a trellis, it's a guidepost for what Christ wants to do, so He can grow the vine. So He can be the vine, we can be the branches. That's what this is. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, but we need to be a group of people, a church that is constantly being formed by this good Savior that we have. Well, this has been a great time. I love you guys. Have a great week.